God, you have a great daughter.
Oh yeah, she is. She's very special. Of her, she grew up with all those brothers, and so she had to kind of fight her way through. She's took care of herself because they picked on her a lot. And
Well, your brothers picked on you a lot too.
oh, they were older. My brothers were 5 and 7 years older than I was, so there was enough where, she had one brother that was 13 months older who's out there playing golf, Steve. And then the other two, of course, were kind of together 2 years apart. But they all managed to think of strange things to do to her. She did some strange things herself. Yeah.
I loved your books, by the way, but in your book, your first book, you talked about your two brothers fighting.
Yes. I was always the underdog, and it varied because they were 2 years apart.
You said whoever was on the bottom?
That was it. Whoever was on top, I was at them. I guess I didn't like their fighting.
Why did you, there was just a few questions I really would like to know answers to. You said somewhere that, it's a quote you've used a couple times in interviews, and you said that dance was happiness to me. And you write beautifully about dance. And to this day, I don't understand why you left New York when you were in Miss Graham's auxiliary dance troupe. You were on your way. And why you left it to go back to, I don't understand that.
Well, actually, my mother was becoming somewhat apprehensive that I was going to go on. And, of course, she was a widow at that time. And she didn't see that in my future. She really was the type of woman who thought, it'd be better for me to come back and meet somebody and get married and have my own family. And when I was in New York, and particularly with the Graham group, which was they were rather a progressive group.
Yeah,
that was not in my background or my family's background.
Well, they were cutting edge. I mean, that was the most experimental.
Right.
I mean, they shot people.
And they also, at that time, that war was going on in Spain, and they were all
left wing.
And I think probably in my conversations with my mother and my letters and so forth, you could see the effect they were having, because they were having a very strong effect on it.
That means your politics and your...
Well, what politics there was, but at least my thinking
was changing because of things.
Well, I was influenced, naturally, because they were the dancers that were leaders, and naturally I was influenced by them.
I was struck in your book that because I never thought of it before this way, and you quote from T.S. Eliot, Thanks the Wasteland, and you talk about the fact that the choice between vocation and family, and that you're not even aware of it at the time, and you look back years later and realize you chose.
Yeah.
And so question is whether you regret the choice. And that is, I don't mean never.
No, never. And I had an opportunity to have a short career. And then, as you know, I was married. And I worked during that marriage. I got into that. And I still had a dance group in Grand Rapids that I, kind of directed and worked with. It was a small group, and it was not, real professional or anything. But it was an outlet for me for my dance.
When what interests me about, I was comparing to Susan a lot about, this could sound like I'm kissing her, but I'm not trying to, but how unique your family is in terms of presidential families. There's no family like yours. And I mean that in an admiring way.
I think it's unusual that we're so close. I think it's the quality, perhaps, that was somehow instilled in our children that both my husband and I had growing up, where our families were close in raising us as a family, our parents.
Right.
And that was kind of what we strived for with our children, because we felt so valued in the situation of our family.
When you were growing up, you felt so valued.
Yes.
I was struck, Mrs. Ford, and this comes from your book, and you mentioned about the fact when you came back to Grand Rapids, but even before you came to New York, and when you started dance, I think you were 8 years old when you started your first dance, and your mother, I believe, was Episcopalian.
Yeah.
There's so many things you looked at as a why, but you said that you made this mention in passing that your mother was president of a charity, and then about working with handicapped children.
That's true. Kept in a hospital, orthopedic hospital for children, as well as going into a neighborhood at that time in the city,
Right.
which the children were
Minority.
Yeah.
And you were how old at this time?
Well, that was pretty much when I came back from New York.
Right.
I did the handicapped children before that. And I got interested in that because, of course, my mother was president of that particular society that supported the handicapped hospital. And so I saw that there was a need there, and I went there with my drum and worked out rhythms that they could do either with their arms or their legs or something, even though they were bedridden in many cases. It was a participation, and it was someone coming in from the outside that cared. And it was good for me.
But why, here's the question I have for you. You said, you talked about going to Vienna, 1956. I can remember when I was a little boy in 56, and the radio, and my father listening to the Hungarian Revolution on the radio. This is in Minneapolis, and being angrier and angrier because Eisenhower, they were pleading for American help, and nobody, the Americans, the British, nobody did it. And you literally could hear on the radio the shooting in Budapest outside the radio station and the killing going on. And you were in Vienna, and these refugees
were coming through. And of course, we were kind of with the embassy there somewhat because my husband was official as a member of Congress.
But you said that was that experience of seeing these people. You said that it gave you a sense of uselessness and that you were a frivolous woman. Do you remember that?
Well, I was traveling and that was why I was so glad to work in that soup kitchen and have a little feeling of being of use. I hadn't done anything particularly helpful in the cases. I hadn't done anything like that.
But your mother had been useful in the sense that charity.
She always was.
Right?
Yeah.
So could you say you learned that from your mother?
Oh, I think she influenced me tremendously, as most mothers do, either positively or negatively. And she was a very positive influence.
I wish you'd tell me just a little story. There's an anecdote you just referred to in your book, which just sticks in my head. You talked about, I can't remember the lake. There's some lake up there that you...
Oh, yes.
Lake White something.
Whitefish.
Whitefish Lake, where you spent these happy summers.
Yeah.
And you said about storms on the lake. Mm-hmm. And you'd get frightened, and your mother would put...
I was a little girl, yeah.
Could you tell me that?
Oh, yeah. I was a little girl with these two older brothers who were, of course, more grown and very brave.
Right.
And I obviously told my mother that I worried about the thunder and lightning and the storm. And she wanted to assure me that this was nature.
Right.
In its way, and that she carried me out on the porch of our cottage and said, now watch how beautiful it is. And we kind of watched the storm roll in, and then we went inside, and it gave me a whole different feeling about a storm rolling in. It gave me the beauty of it rather than the fear.
But you said I think, but what you said is that your mother taught you not to fear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that struck me is you said when you were watching the storm, your mother put her arm around you and that you felt safe in those arms.
Oh, very definitely. As a child will with their mother.
Not all mothers.
Well, not all mothers are affectionate that way.
This stories remind me of two things. In a good way, is you taught when you wrote about the intervention, or you taught. This was in your book. It was from one of the interviews with you. And you're talking about the family showing about how cross you were. And tell me a little bit about that, then I'll get to the question about the intervention.
Oh, about the intervention. Well, of course, I was very angry at my family for even inferring that I was anything but what they had always told me, perfect, or what I always thought was perfect. I didn't realize how ill I was. And they were pointing out the discrepancies that had happened between us and how disappointed and how let down they were as far as I was concerned. And I wasn't the mother I had been. And that was very painful.
That you changed.
Yeah. very painful for me to hear. And actually, I was trying to deny anything, which is human nature when someone is criticizing or
You resent it.
you know. And I finally burst into tears and was so upset, and it eventually penetrated to the point where I knew I needed help. And before that, I would deny that I needed any help.
Listen, in talking about it, you said that what sort of turned the trick for you was that your president put his arm around you.
Oh, no.
And
Well, and I think one of the things, there were several things that were said, like our oldest son and his wife were there, and when they said they wanted children, they wanted to have children, but they didn't want to have children when they had a grandmother that they couldn't trust with their,
But you said he put his arm around you and said, we're doing this. Remember what he said?
because we love you.
And you said that really hit home.
Oh, yeah. And I did. I realized they had all come together. It was just such a shock to me because it came as such a surprise. I had no forewarning, really. And perhaps you remember when I said I saw them, they all came in about, I don't know, it was 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And I still wasn't dressed. And they all came in, and I thought, oh, they all know I'm not feeling well, and they've all come to see me, and how dear of them. And then I realized there was a Navy nurse and a Navy doctor and another doctor, and I thought, oh, this is not what I'm thinking. And I got very worried. But as you said, my husband just kind of did. He took me to the couch and put his arm around me, and he said, we're doing this now because we love you.
When I was walking around this place yesterday, and we're talking about the internet, and I was saying about the sense of safety you have here, the sense of calm, of shelter, and I thought of that as Episcopal. I'm Episcopal. There's a term in Episcopal is sheltering arms. You see a lot. The sheltering arms school, and I thought, and so when I read about his putting his arm around you, and your mother putting her arms around you, and I thought, well, this is in a way, the poor family is putting their arm. It's like a place of sheltering arms.
That's really the way it has been with the growth in our. And I think even with the fact that there's Mary and other, grandchildren and so forth. But the amazing thing to me is that our children, our in-laws and whatnot, they all get along together. Now, I'm not saying they all are, all the time, but generally speaking, there are not a lot of resentments within the children or they're the ones that they've married, or it's a unit that has really, as it's expanded, just grown very much together in appreciation of each other. They all have different qualities.
I was going to say we're very diverse, very different.
Yes, they all have different qualities, and they're all, talented in different ways. But there's an appreciation of what each one of them does by the other. There's not a lot of jealousy. They accept what the other is, accomplishing.
But why, we're talking about your grandmother.
You didn't know her.
I never knew her.
My children never knew. My mother died 10 days after President Ford and I were married.
Oh,
I never knew.
And, but his mother.
We were very close to Grandma Ford.
Yeah, and that family was also a closely knit family. And the fact that we married, it just made it that much stronger.
But part of what it interests me that your daughter, Susan, you're talking about your mother, she was talking about her mother, and her mother being president of this charity, and about her mother. When she was a girl, Mrs. Ford going and dealing with handicapped children. It's a family thing that goes a long way back, the sense of duty, as we were talking about earlier. And now your daughter has taken, I'm not done with you.
I know.
But your daughter took, after your cancer, took up that issue.
Yes, she took up that issue and carried that. And really carried it beautifully. We did a lot of things together, but then Susan was off on her own, and she continued to do speaking and positive things in breast cancer, testifying down in Washington before committees about mastectomy and the fact that they need to be paid for, through health insurance and so forth.
You must be very proud of her.
Well, I don't want to say that in front of her.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, then I'll say.
I knew it was coming out of her mouth.
She wouldn't, of course I am.
No, geez.
Yeah, of course I am, and she knows I'm proud of her. I wouldn't ask her
She wouldn't have asked me to take this.
chair this. No, I wouldn't have asked her to chair this if I wasn't proud of her, and I didn't know she would do a great job. She has the ability.
See, if you weren't here, this is the question. I'm going to have a president anyway. I don't care whether you're not.
Okay. She'll tell you.
Did you expect her? Did you sort of mold her to do this, or is this unexpected? Did you think she would end
I
up?
didn't know she'd show that much interest in it when I asked her to join the board. And then I saw her grow in her position, with her growth as far as the board was. Excuse me, I've got all these allergies and then I got a nosebleed. So I could see the strength that she had, and I also realized how much she'd done with breast cancer. She was capable of doing this in a different way than I did from the family side, which is a very big part of recovery. And she was capable of addressing that.
This is the first I want to ask you, too. You've talked often about life having a purpose. You talk about the fact that about various people who you love who die, and you say there's nothing you can do about it. God, and then I'm paraphrasing. God put you on this earth for a purpose, and what you do, what you're meant to do, He takes you away, and there's nothing to do about it. I mean, that's basically what you said.
Well,
what interests me is the idea that there is an obligation attendant upon being human. That there's and what is that?
I guess I just believe that perhaps from having absorbed it from
Your mother.
Yeah.
And that obligation.
particularly my mother, because my father was away so much and he died when I was 16. So there was a much stronger link to my mother than my father.
And what is that? What is that obligation? What is that duty that I suppose God?
Well, I think if you're God has, people say, well, God must know something. I think I have something more to do, because I survived breast cancer, I survived alcoholism, I survived a quadruple bypass that was very complicated and had to be repeated 2 more times.
I understand.
The year I got my divorce, it was a wonderful year.
Oh, God Almighty, I had no idea. I didn't know.
And,
She got an infection in her incision.
I had a staph infection.
Which nobody knows.
I never knew that.
Well, I never talked about it too much because I felt
That's
that.
something you'd like to talk about.
It was not a good year.
No, it wasn't a good year.
And I figured that I've talked about breast cancer and I've talked about alcoholism. Nobody's going to want to hear about it.
Her bleeding to death.
They wanted me to talk about it, and I said no. He wanted me to do a chapter in a book on women and hearts, and I said, no, I've done all the chapters I'm going to do.
One thing that interests me, one of the reasons I'm here actually is when you look at, I think I mentioned this to you, so when you look at, Mrs. Bales, when you look at presidential families, and I look at that, I think, forgetting all the political problems, but my God, they're given the gift of fame, which means that anything they put their attention to compels public attention.
You have it right.
Right?
Yeah.
And they can put, the daughter of a president can decide she wants to be a movie actress, and the press pays attention to her movie act because that's what she wants to be, or become whatever. Or they can use the fame, as it almost invariably is what happens, for self-aggrandizement. They use it, they cash in on it.
They can.
Why is it that your family, and we're here because of Susan, hasn't done that?
Well,
and the fame is being used for public purposes.
I'm surprised they haven't done it for political purposes.
Well, I'm too. We're just.
No, but Mother, at the same time, I would say the one advantage, and Steve did it, and Jack, and I did it all. After we left the administration,
Oh, you did a lot of interviews.
there were a lot more opportunities offered to us. Something that I don't like to admit to is that I co-hosted a talk show.
I remember that.
I mean, I go back and look at those tapes and
I know
just
that.
die.
Right.
I mean, Jim is a wonderful person, and I give him a lot of credit for tolerating me. But I mean, even Steve in the acting, I mean,
Yes.
he
He
wrote,
kind of fell into
that kind of fell into his hands. I don't think that's something that was on his list of I want to do's or whatever. I think they convinced him that he would be good at it.
But I don't think that, if you look at the Roosevelt, and the Kennedys are just too well. I mean, you look just at the Roosevelt children. We're talking about this the other night in terms of Susan. Of first ladies, I think by general agreement, you hate me for saying this, but generally it's considered there are 3 or 4, we've had 3 or 4 great first ladies in 2 centuries. And in the last century, the 20th century, we've had 3. And one is Eleanor Roosevelt.
who I've always admired.
One is you, and one is Jacqueline Kennedy, for very different reasons. And but all 3 of them changed their nation for the better. Right?
I think I admired Eleanor Roosevelt for her independence, and not that I tried to follow in her footsteps, but I'm sure it had some effect on me. That he didn't just succumb to his political, yes, to a certain extent, but she also had her own political agenda. And I guess by the time my husband was born in as president, I had a certain amount of political agenda that wasn't always the same as his.
Really?
Well, we should work on the ERA amendment, calling congressmen and senators on the phone.
Well, but I had also grown up in a family where my father was a Democrat and my mother was a Republican. So I could understand 2 people loving each other, but having 2 political agendas. Now, ours has never been that extreme, but there have been times when I have kind of neglected to fall into my husband's particular, because I didn't feel strong about the issues. I didn't feel really so.
Mrs. Wood, your daughter, mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt. None of Eleanor Roosevelt's children, most particularly her daughter Anna, took up her mother's causes.
No.
They all went off on various different tangents, which were, which were largely self-serving, various development schemes, and so they had.
Didn't they have 5?
I think they had 6.
Oh, did they have 6?
They had 5 boys and Anna. And even with the Kennedys, in terms of the president, Caroline basically does local stuff, and it's not, I mean, it's really not her life. And most of the Democratic Party related. But she's
They love the museum.
Well, they loved John, because John was more political, and yet with his magazine.
But he was, but he's gone. The point is, I'm trying to pay a compliment here, which is that I think your daughter is exceptional in the fact that she's taken on to continue on your.
Well, I've just beat it into her.
You beat it into her.
You're dismissed now.
No, I think Susan became so concerned about the breast cancer, and particularly when it first happened, you thought I was going to die for sure. And then you saw the outpouring of the mail at the White House. You were aware of that. And not right at that time did you become active, but as I became more active, you could see the importance of it, I believe.
Well, a lot of it, too, was...
You're a candidate for breast cancer.
Well, yes, I am a candidate for breast cancer, but also I had little children. I didn't start getting involved until Heather was 2.
That's so young.
Well, yeah, she was little, but at the same time, it was enough. When that program got started, it was a week a year. We started it, and when Heather was 2, and Heather's now 22, it started off as a week a year. National Breast Cancer Awareness Week started in October of 1985 or 6. I can't remember which one it was, because Heather was born in 83. And they said, can you give us a week a year? I went, sure.
Looks like a good idea.
Well, it then went from week to month to, it snowballed into a year-long thing. But I also had the option to say, no, I'm not available.
But you didn't.
I said no to a lot of things.
No, but you kept at it.
I kept at it. But my family was still my number 1 priority, because during that time I did go through a divorce, went through a remarriage, and all of those things, and I realized that my family was still my number one priority.
But my
Where's Dr. West?
Dotson, excuse me just one second. Dr. West is going home, and I wanted you just to
Oh,
know,
my
we talked
God.
about him last night. Dotson Rader.
Wonderful. I heard so much about you. My God, it's wonderful to meet you, sir.
meet you. I'm not going home.
We're missing you out there.
See, I miss you. You'll be here tomorrow, I hope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wonderful.
I'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah, wonderful article in the Free.
Why?
She did not, let me respond to that, she did not beat it into me.
No.
I wanted that. I'm trying to. What's it exceptional?
I think, Susan, we have managed to have a pretty close relationship as a mother-daughter. And I think in that we have shared a lot. You have been very helpful in letting me do these things, and you naturally absorb some of it. And I think the fact that you also realized this was a thing that could be passed on to you got you even more interested, and you were interested in getting the message out there.
Well, yes, I would say that has a lot to do with it. Also with me being the one who put the intervention together, which Dotson and I will go back and we still have to talk about that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to come here and spend a weekend or to be on the board, and we have criteria for our board members. You must participate in programs, and
they're all supposed to spend that 3 days.
you're supposed to spend 3 days observing.
Well,
Oh,
as
really?
a patient.
Well, but you don't get to be a patient. You get to observe. You don't get to comment. You don't get to
Right.
participate. You get to observe. So that
And you don't sleep here, but you come in early every morning and stay through the whole
whole
We know
day,
what's going on.
so you know what's going on. And
From the
I
patient standpoint.
have done that, and then I have gone through our family program here to refresh myself on family and that sort of thing. But you also have to remember that, you're not the only family member I have in recovery anymore. So this disease has affected me with more than one family member.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, and that's, so it continues to affect me.
The alcoholism. And, just 2 points. One is
John's
that
coming in.
She's got to go take a rest before she goes back to work.
Well, I've got to go get the father.
is there being Episcopalian.
That has a big effect on me.
Well, being Christian.
Yeah.
In the Bible, there's the Christ line, to whom much is given, much will be expected.
Right.
And
The poor shall inherit.
I'm not trying to take credit away from what the family's accomplished, but what is remarkable is that a family that, in a political sense, reached the height. There's a long, much longer than the political life of the family. This family has continued to give back to. My question is why? Why do you continue? I mean, you're in your 80s, and you've got a life of your own, and yet you continue to find the time.
Well, examples for me and for my husband have been our parents, and I think that becomes kind of a hereditary thing. As they were examples for us, we tend to be maybe examples to our children.
Well, I will say my husband Baden's family is the same way. They're very involved in their community. Don Chalmers, who's playing here in the golf tournament, who's my husband's real estate partner, gives back to the community. Those are the kinds of people that I choose to be around that give back to the community. It's something like she says, you inherit it. It's part of your makeup. To me, there's nothing worse than someone who criticizes an election but doesn't vote.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, what's the difference with giving back to the community? How can you make a change in the community or impact into the nation if you don't give to it, if you don't participate in it?
But most people don't.
People I hang around do.
Well, no, point of fact, though, and the facts are.
That, to me, that's character. It's part of someone's character. Yes, they can choose to do it. They can choose to do it because they have to do it, or they can choose to go do it because they get something out of it. It improves their character that they learn something. To me, it's a true character building experience, something that makes you a better person. You learn something.
I think also, even if you do it for the advantage of perhaps your community or how people see you, you gain character. You may do it for the wrong reason in the beginning, but it changes because you realize.
Well, look at the kids that have to do community service.
Yeah.
To graduate from high school, and then usually
Right.
that's
Which is a big improvement.
which is a huge improvement, but it's usually a private school that you have to do so many community service hours. I would say the majority of those kids do it begrudgingly,
Yes, I agree with you, yeah.
unless they find something that they're truly interested in, the animal shelter or,
Going to old people's homes.
yeah, or reading to children in school or whatever. They want to be a teacher. They do it begrudgingly. I think it truly improves their character. They will learn something from it. They may not learn it for 10 years, but that seed has been planted. And I think at some point they will probably choose to go back and do it again. I went through stages in my life that I can't say I gave back to the community, that I was a very selfish individual. I didn't have time. But then when you realize that if you make the time, even when you don't have the time, you get a whole lot more out of it. But some of that's maturity. Some of that is just age. I don't want to say I'm a terribly mature person because I'm...
Well, I think some of the things we dread the most because we feel we have to do it turn out to be, get the most satisfaction out of it.
Right.
It's kind of a surprise.
But at its heart, in terms of your family, why this family is involved and has been so long now involved, and by the way, issues that when you started weren't at all popular.
Yeah.
No, it would be, no, I'm serious. It would be like 10 years ago deciding you're going to come out and helping people with AIDS.
Yeah.
I mean, these were breast cancer, and these were pariah issues, and alcoholism still is, and drug addiction even more so, are pariah issues, because people think it's their own fault.
Yeah.
And you stick to it, and you stick at it, and you stick at it. I mean, the question is why. I think, I'll just drop it. Is it because you have a sense of moral obligation that you're taught, that you believe that this is what God put you on here, all of us, to do? We have an obligation to each other, or is it peculiar to your little family?
No, I think in my case, I felt perhaps growing up, and if it wasn't through my family, I think I felt it perhaps what I learned in church, that we all have a certain moral obligation to be beneficial to somebody. I know certainly when I first was in recovery and whatnot, and I'd get to the point where I was feeling very sorry for myself, why me or something, or you can do that with cancer or something. Anything like that. And then I knew the best thing for me to do was help somebody else, and I would feel better.
Right.
And I learned that through doing it, rather than being for me. Helping somebody else gave me a whole different attitude. So that's a learning process.
Well, also part of it need to be useful.
Yeah.
Because you're saying about in Vienna with the refugees, they have uselessness.
Yeah.
Why is it Susan? Oh, my sip's over. Why is it Susan? Why is it Susan rather than one of the boys who was?
I'm better looking than the rest of them. I have more hair than the rest of them.
They're active in their own field. Like we have our oldest son who went through ministry,
Right.
and he's
I didn't mean to pick on them. I mean,
No.
why? But if you could choose of the 4 children, why is Susan the most suitable, the best for becoming chairman here? But why Susan? Why is she the one that's the caregiver, and why is she?
probably because she was the one that realized I needed help, and I felt that she was the one who would probably have the most reason. Now, I'll admit that the boys probably wondered at first why I asked Susan to go on the board, and why not them, like Steve would wonder, because Jack probably knew, and Mike probably knew it was just inconvenient.
But they weren't living in the desert, and I was.
Yeah. So, and I think it's from mother-daughter. There's a very strong mother-daughter bond. Just as there is with her father, she's very active at his...
No, but she's very close to you.
Yeah.
Why don't you franchise this place? Why aren't there Betty Fords all over the...
No.
Oh, now that I'm chairman, we are.
I just fired
Your
her.
husband was looking.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
awesome.
But
it works. So it
No, we're very helpful. We will help
I
people.
mean, it's a model that works.
Yeah.
And why isn't it duplicated? I'm really quite curious.
Because
You
we're
don't
not
get anybody
interested.
like promises, or they just don't
It
work.
would not be the Betty Ford Center anymore if it was franchised.
No.
It would become, I would not
I
allow
just
my
finished a
name.
whole task force thing
Yeah.
about that now.
No,
We've had offers, very strong offers.
Money making offers.
yeah.
Well, why? Because you can't control the quality of the care? And who's staffing it?
There's a
And that is,
question of
that
it.
is one of the most important things to
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
is the quality of care.
And,
We may go out, like we have the Dallas program, the
Yeah,
Dallas
right,
Children's
right,
Program.
that's
you have a new Denver program that's doing very well.
And-
It's
and
not a
Pilot.
program, but
Pilot
it's
children's
pilot
program.
children's
So,
program.
we're working on things like that, but I
That's
don't think
fine.
there will ever be another 80-bed, 120-bed like
He's at
this.
home.
He's at home, yeah. I'll see you back over there at lunch, brother.
Okay.
To the quad.
Okay.
Both of her brothers had cardiac problems, so I mean,
So they die, if they die of that.
it's obviously a genetic.
Right.
And then her mother died of an aneurysm, I think.
Oh, God.
So anyway, they went in and did the bypass, and they let her out. And I can't remember if they were aware that she had a staph infection or they were unaware that she had gotten a staph infection while she was in the hospital. Which, they all say that actually, you never get rid of all staph in a
Right.
hospital. And she was sitting at home at the desk in the den having her dessert and coffee, and she was in her favorite silk robe, and she felt this warm sensation between her legs. She looked down, and blood was just pouring out of her chest. The staph infection had eaten the sutures on the body.
Oh, God.
So luckily, they only live 5 minutes from here. I mean, just literally 5 minutes, if it's 5
Was
minutes.
it Eisenhower?
Yeah, so they called, I'm just trying to remember all the details. I guess she either laid down in the den or whatever, and the doctor, who was her bypass doctor, got over here faster than the ambulance got to the house, and he stood on her chest until the ambulance got there
Oh, my
to
God.
stop the bleeding. So then, after they got her stabilized, they had to take her back to the operating room and redo that bypass.
And this is when you were having done your divorce.
Was getting a divorce, yes. It was a bad year. The best part of that was that I weighed 119 pounds. I have never weighed 119 pounds. It's called the divorce diet. If you ever want to get really thin, you get a divorce. I think the last time I had weighed 119 pounds was probably 6th grade. But
Let me answer that. I want to go through real quickly the intervention, what you learned from it, how it changed you.